Yay Networks.
Welcome to Greg Louganis is Alive, the podcast that challenges what you think you know. So, this is part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Maya. Enjoy.
It's the usual, I guess capitalist conundrum, if I can say it like that, which is, and our healthcare system, it's funny, not to digress too much, but I was interviewing someone in Europe for an event I was doing on psychedelics. And he basically very offhandedly said, yeah, but in your country, obviously it's just so terrible. I don't know how you can expect to treat anything because nobody really gets good care. And I was like, the way he said it as if it was so obvious, I was like, okay, stop. We need to unpack this because we're so used to it here. We don't even realize it in the rest of the world. Not to say psychedelics are being offered all over the world. They're not yet. But once they are, which is likely to be the case, because we are having a lot of clinical studies and, the more and more and more scientific literature is coming out literally weekly, if not daily. I see new, really interesting, promising studies. In the rest of the world, it's going to be a lot more accessible than it will be here in the US because our insurance system is really rigged and challenging and unfair.
Well, the driver in that seat is big pharma and all that. And so, a lot of the holistic and natural approaches are kind of discarded or, shamed, stigmatized, so, so that's really, really frustrating. Cause I feel that being in the US and then traveling to various places in the world and seeing there's just a totally different mindset, thought. It's like where did this thought come from that psychedelics are bad, tripping is this is bad and should be made illegal and you're going to lose your mind, kind of thing. When taken properly, it couldn't be further from what that representation is.
Well, right. I think it's interesting because throughout history, and this is why I wrote, I called my book The Master Plant Experience, because the way that indigenous people view these psychedelic master plants, and I really focus not on like LSD, MDMA, ketamine, but more on mushrooms, ayahuasca, San Pedro cactus, peyote, and so on, because I just wanted to kind of go into, to your point, this long history of these very powerful plants. And they're called master plants because they're literally considered by indigenous people to be master teachers who transmit ancient knowledge. And you are in relationship with masters when you engage with what they would call a sacrament, right? They wouldn't call it a drug, a psychedelic, even a medicine. They might not even say, they will sometimes say medicina, but oftentimes we're talking about something that they consider to be a sacrament. And they, in many cases, and I'm not speaking, obviously indigenous people are not like a monolith, but I've learned with a lot of different teachers. And so I'll speak for at least the teachers I've learned with, that they consider this a relationship with like the spirit of the plant, right? And it's really sickness is not just physical for them. We have like physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies, and all of them influence each other. And from what I learned, right, which was very paradigm changing for me, when I started learning this, over a decade ago, they consider spiritual sickness to be the most kind of upstream, right? Physical illness, physical symptoms, even mental symptoms are downstream. So it's a really interesting paradigm. And from a physiologic standpoint, if I could just nerd out for one moment about that, what we now know about our cells in all over our body, brain and otherwise, from actually a very dear friend of mine who's also a colleague, Dr. Robert Navio at UC San Diego, is that when our cells undergo an insult of any kind, okay, could be physical, could be mental, could be emotional, could be spiritual, they don't really differentiate in their response what their response, whether it was one or the other. For them, they go into something called cell danger mode. And cell danger mode, the cell is operating differently, right? Like to the point of those neurons we talked about, the lonely neurons, they become more they turn inward and they're in survival mode. And they can, when this persists, can lead to things like autoimmunity and chronic pain and depression and all of these things, right? So it makes a lot of sense to me now in physiology that we have and know in modern science that indigenous science actually understood something a long time ago, that we are kind of just wrapping our heads around. But they would never call these a drug. However, they would say master plants are neither good nor bad. They're powerful, right? What is your relationship with power? Because talking about how these became drugs, for example, in the 1960s, right? After the 1950s and 60s, there was very promising research on depression, on OCD. And then, we had Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, and they were encouraging everybody to take them. And people were, the CIA and actually the military through MK Ultra were like randomly dosing their own agents and so on. I mean, it was a free for all, right? And it was a way of poorly interacting with power. It was not respectful. It was not reverent. It was not careful. It was like a bunch of toddlers getting their hands on, whatever the remote control. I don't know what
the crayons or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So in that case, we could kind of say, yeah, that was like kind of using it as a drug, right? We were consumers, we were takers, and we weren't really thinking about, to the point of these masters, like if I'm going to a master, I'm going to prepare myself for one thing, right? I'm not just going to like show up on, Thich Nhat Hanh's door and be like, hey, bro, I'm going to prepare myself. I'm going to come in like the clothing and and then I'm going to not like come every single day and like bother the hell out of that guy. I'm going to take these lessons, whatever gifts he can give over to me, I'm going to go off and I'm going to really unpack that and think about how can I elevate my own life and the lives of other people before I'm going to go back and start, knocking on his door. So that's kind of more the way we might be thinking of how to be in relationship with these as a sacrament and as a real medicine, as opposed to a drug, which we absolutely can use these as drugs. We have,
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, cause I've done an ayahuasca journey and all that stuff. And there's preparation that's involved. There's fasting. There's, all of these preparation for this experience. And so it is like what you said, a sacrament. It is not, it's not a recreational thing. It is, and I think the most important thing in my experience is like if you find somebody like yourself, for therapy or whatever work you're doing, whatever path you're on, is really, I mean, it's like with a good teacher or a good coach, that's somebody that you respect, love, and trust. There's so much trust in that.
I think thinking about it as a relationship, right? Rather than I'm taking this. I'm right. I think the word take is so interesting with medicine because in a lot of cultures, we are considered takers. Like, I found it very interesting, and I wrote about this in my book, that when I was in South America, a lot of people from the global north, we'll call it, were referred to as junkies. And it wasn't just about consuming drugs or something like that, but it was about not just taking and taking and taking and consuming without having any respect for what's sacred or the people or anything like that. And, it was an interesting insight, right, into our culture. And it's really definitely guided my own approach as I coach people through these kinds of experiences and how or whether they want to engage.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it is our, here in the U.S. It does seem, because all you have to do is look at your waste. Look at the amount of waste that we create. And we're just tossing. But yeah, and with this plant medicine, my sense is that it's communing with this very powerful piece of earth. Ayahuasca's mother, and peyote is mother, and then peyote's father, and that whole relationship that we have with living things. They're plants, and teachers, right?
Absolutely. I think, people ask me, why do you think these psychedelics are kind of becoming popular now? And, I talk a lot in the book about the consciousness of plants. I look into the science of the consciousness around plants and mycelial intelligence and things like that. And, one of the things I do think these plants have wisdom, and I actually do think they have consciousness and intention. And one of the things that is across the board pretty common for anyone who has a big experience with a master plant is, for one thing, very commonly, they'll say, ayahuasca told me, or the mushroom said, etc. People do not, as a rule, I'm not saying never, as a rule, they will not say MDMA told me X. They'll say, in my MDMA journey, I realized XYZ, but they're not experiencing it in the same kind of relationship. It doesn't make it less potent. I'm not even judging that at all. Simply that the plants have this kind of consciousness that many, if not most people can describe. And one of the big lessons that people take away, and this is described in kind of the scientific literature of mystical experience, is this sense of everything is connected, everything is alive, everything is one. And that nature is alive, right? This whole idea that we are surrounded by not things, but beings.
Right. Intelligence. We're surrounded by the intelligence. Then everything created, there's an intelligence, whether it be a plant, whether it be an animal, whether it be, whatever that is, there's an intelligence.
Well, and it's very beautiful because having that insight, even if it's a temporary insight that everything around us is alive, everything is intelligent, and that we're part of that and we're connected to that, it's a way that it, I think, really can help relieve a lot of what I would call existential loneliness, this spiritual suffering that I think in our material society, which has its perks for sure, but also there is this sense of separateness, and there is this sense of searching for purpose and searching for connection, right? Even to our own lineage, to our ancestors. I mean, there's this sense of disconnection. And I think having those moments of sacred connection in these ceremonies really opens things up for a lot of people and changes their lives, absolutely changes their lives permanently. Like, they can't go back.
Yeah. Now, are you talking that like a one-time treatment, or I know you mentioned microdosing over a period of time to get positive results. Is there a difference between the two?
There is. Right. So people are less likely to have a big, altered experience, right? I mean, the whole point of microdosing is you can do your life. You can parent, you can drive a car, you can go to work. What I think is really interesting, and the data I think is going to come over time. We're seeing very promising data. Some people say, oh, that's not going to help because people aren't altered. They're not altered in the sense of, being out of commission and kind of seeing the colors and the visions and so on. But I actually have found that some people are a lot more sensitive and a lot more able to access that sort of mystical state. And what I found, and there are a lot of studies looking at how people describe their microdosing experiences. That's a little harder to study. Just to give a context, the reason we don't have tons of studies on this is because universities and academic centers have what are called IRB boards, where they're the institutional review, and they don't want to give people psychedelics, which are not legal in many places, to take out in the world. So they would say, okay, to microdose, you'd have to come, take it, and spend the whole day sitting in this clinic. And nobody who's microdosing, if anyone's done that, I mean, you feel more or less regular. The last thing you're going to do is be like, I'm sitting, right? The whole idea of microdosing is you can live your life, but start to like perceive differently and experience these like epiphanies and synchronicities and moments of wonder more easily. So people will describe when they're microdosing, for example, it was so much easier to take care of myself. I felt like I could more easily like go for a run or exercise, or I didn't feel like I needed to like rely on cannabis or alcohol during the day when on the days I was microdosing or so on, right? Or, I felt more social, right? I was able to be out with people more, and people have weaned off antidepressants, to your point. It's really interesting, actually, what we learned just this year about the mechanism of psychedelics as compared to, let's say, SSRIs or even our own serotonin is, I'm sorry, I have to bring these little nerdy moments in, right?
Yeah, no, it's great.
So serotonin, typically neurotransmitters in general, bind to a receptor to activate, to kind of create their activity. They bind to a receptor that sits outside the cell, on the cell membrane. So it's not inside, right? And so it was confusing. Like, why are all these serotonin receptors the mechanism for psychedelics when we know our serotonin receptors are being activated by SSRIs or being activated by our own endogenous serotonin that we make in our bodies? It turns out there are serotonin receptors, certain serotonin receptors inside the cell. So they're like intracellular, hiding inside, and psychedelics can pass through easily because of their structure, the lipid membrane of the cell, and activate these hidden sort of, I think of them as like these stealth serotonin receptors that our actual serotonin or even SSRIs cannot activate. So it's very interesting, right? The ways that this works. And I think we're going to see microdosing and even more vibrational dosing, like quantum dosing, become a real thing for people who are sensitive, people who are medically complicated, certain mental health conditions like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. These people may be more prone to psychotic breaks, even if they have a family history but no evidence in themselves. If they take a big dose, people on certain medications may not be able to. People who are pregnant, right? We have a whole bunch of people who I think might do much better and feel that sense of connection and experience plasticity. It will just unfold maybe more gently over time, but still get those serotonin receptors being activated, still getting the plasticity and so on, and benefit just as much as anybody else, perhaps.
Okay, Dr. Maya, you mentioned quantum dosing. I'm just curious, what is quantum dosing?
So quantum dosing is really interesting concept that started in my understanding of indigenous approaches to healing. So if you've been in an ayahuasca ceremony, for anyone who's been in a ceremony like that, you know that there are these, let's call them songs, called Icaros, right? And they're sung by the maestro, the ayahuasquero who's running the ceremony. And they're not his or her songs. They are given over by the plant during the person's training with the plant, which could have been months and months and months or years of really intensively learning with the plant. And what these Icaros are considered to be are vibrational sound medicine, equal in potency to ingesting the plant. So sometimes, like in some ayahuasca ceremonies that are indigenous, the people other than the maestro don't even take ayahuasca or take a teeny dose that's like a nothing. And they hear the Icaros, and, these Icaros can make you feel very different. Like some of them are, going to make you feel like I'm going to vomit. I need to, and scared and intense. And some of them are going to make you cry and cry and cry. And then some of them might make you feel like you're grounding and coming back in your body and calming down. They're medicine. They're considered to be medicine, and they're vibrational. And so this is a form of quantum dosing, right? Where it's sort of looking at things like quantum physics and quantum biology. How does that, for indigenous communities, they don't call it that. They don't call it quantum dosing, but it's like, It's the medicine. It's just the medicine is not just physical. So there are ways to work with the vibrations of the plants, like ways of listening to certain, like Icaros as an example, or I grow the plants. So I have a 10-year-old ayahuasca vine. I don't consume the vine. I grow San Pedro cacti. I grow Brugmansia. I grow tobacco. And I don't consume them. But in the tending of them, they kick my butt. Honestly, they're very, right? There's a feeling that like there's an exchange, right? I'm in service to them, tending them, and they give over information to me. So there's a way, that you can even capture this in like drops, right? So we actually created these quantum drops. And I say we, like me and the ayahuasca vine, with medicine songs, with ceremony. And we call them ceremony in a bottle because they're really potent. And it's sort of this way, how do we bring the extraordinary into the ordinary? Because you could take them every day. They're safe for anybody. They're legal. And there's, I think, going to be a lot of ways we are going to start seeing more kind of quantum dosing, right? Vibrational kinds of dosing. I even think, the cover of my book has the picture of an ayahuasca slice. And it's like a sacred geometry. I mean, it's so unbelievable. When you slice an ayahuasca vine, you see this beautiful pattern. And it's same is true of San Pedro cacti. They're so gorgeous and magical, really looking. To me, that's also a way of quantum dosing. You look at it, and the second you look at the image, you feel something, you change. That's part of the medicine of the plant too. Yeah.
I mean, it is. I mean, it goes back to, everything is energy, right? So it's the energy that is given and that's received. Because I had a friend of mine who talked about their ayahuasca journey, and they didn't take any ayahuasca. It was all the shaman, who took the medicine, and everybody experienced, through him energetically and vibrationally, had that experience. So yeah, it's incredible. Now, okay, Dr. Maya, so you have The Dirt Cure is one of your books. And then you also have the master plant experience. How do people stay in touch with you? How keep up with what you're doing?
Well, the best way is to go to my website, which is drmaya.com, like just DRMAYA. And I have lots of information there and free downloads and things so people can just educate themselves and learn. They can also go and get the first 3 chapters of my book for free. So they can see like if it seems interesting and they want to keep going. And then the other best place to go is Instagram is where I'm most active, and Threads, which is just Dr. Maya Shetreat.
And you also certify people to want to practice, right?
Yeah, we have a certification program. It's starting in January 2024. So we're opening applications next month, and people can train to be certified in psychedelic practice. So it's great for medical practitioners and healthcare people and others who want to learn more about these practices.
That's awesome. Well, Dr. Maya, thank you so much for being on my podcast and sharing so much wisdom about, these master plants and the really gifts, that they offer and give us, and insights. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my honor.
Thank you for tuning in, and be sure, if you enjoyed the podcast, hit like, share with your friends, and we're going to be back next week. So tune in. Don't miss an episode. Namaste.
Yay Networks.